This is Advisor 3.0, a show designed to help you as a financial advisor elevate your professional practice, transform your clients' lives, and take your business to the next level. I am Abraham Okusoya. Welcome to the show.
Welcome to Advisor 3.0, and today I am delighted to be joined by Simon Harvey, who is the founder and owner of BDH Sterling. Welcome.
Thanks, Kate, and
Thanks.
Thanks for having me on the podcast.
No, thanks for coming all this way. And just for those that don't know, and before you jump into kind of the overview of BDH Sterling, you have got the privilege of running 3 offices, Epsom, Sydney and Perth. I thought I'd start off today, Simon, by just talking a little bit about you, for those of you that don't know the Simon as I do. So just want to share for our listeners a little about you and the journey you've gone on.
So I've been a financial planner for about 20 years now. Started off working at a boutique financial planning firm that was helping people move to Australia and helping them with their financial planning around the move. I was there for around 5 years, learned a lot at that firm, got a real understanding of how the UK and Australian kind of system works and how they interact with each other. And I just thought, there's a fantastic opportunity here to set up a business that helps people move between the 2 countries, but also to have a presence in both jurisdictions. So rather than just help them with the move and then pass them on to an Australian firm, I wanted to do it all under one roof. So set up BDH Sterling about 15 years ago now, and we've got around 50 people across the 2 countries.
Wow. And do you think that from your point of view, you thought that'd be an easy decision to support across 2?
I probably underestimated it, it would be fair to say. So yeah, two jurisdictions, 2 sets of legislation, 2 sets of products, 2 lots of everything basically. So it is quite difficult, but it is quite rewarding as well. So it's been something that I've really enjoyed the journey we've been on. It's certainly been a challenge, but it's been very rewarding at the same time.
And just taking it back a step, Australia, have you travelled before? Had it been somewhere that you'd kind of embarked on and wanted to sort of settle or work as be a part of? How did that come about, or was it pure coincidence? Yeah,
so when I was training or doing my qualifications, I was initially at Legal and General. That was my first job. Decided I wanted to become a financial planner, so did my qualifications there. And then before I started my career, I wanted to do a year's travelling. So I went and spent a year travelling Australia, had a fantastic time, kind of fell in love with the country. And then when I came back to England and started looking for a job, I was interviewing at some of the big banks, but the opportunity came up with this boutique firm that I mentioned, and I thought, wow, that actually sounds really interesting, and it might actually be a path to get me back to Australia in the future. So, you know, it was it just figured that way, and that's how it happened, and it's all worked out well for me. So.
And the relationship with the boutique now, how does that fit into the picture? Is that something that's become a part of BDH, or is that something separate?
Yeah, so that's something completely separate. So when we went and left that firm, it was myself and my co-founder left the firm and set up our own business. I guess we're in direct competition, so we are, you know, I do still speak to the founder of that business, and but we've been on separate journeys since then. So
fab. And how do you even go about setting up a firm that is going to look after people in the UK and people in Australia?
Yeah, so we started off by becoming directly authorised in the UK, and I think we needed to be directly authorised because what we wanted to do was so different. We needed that autonomy as to how we ran the business, and so got the UK side of the business going first, got some scale going. Initially we were just working with firms in Australia and doing the kind of transfer advice and restructuring, the advice around restructuring affairs for Australian residency, and then we were handing the clients on to Australian planners that we were working in association with. But to build value in the firm, we wanted to be able to help those clients on an ongoing basis once they land in Australia, and so we needed to get authorised over there as well. And we initially did a joint venture with a self-licensed firm in Australia so that we could leverage their infrastructure and their licence, and enable us to get the business going in Australia without too much of a capital outlay. And so, yeah, we found a partner that we kind of had cultural alignment with, and that joint venture went really well, and we ended up acquiring and integrating the Australian firm into BDH Sterling. So, and the guy who ran that firm has now retired. So that enabled us to get off the ground in Australia. And then what we set about doing was really aligning the two businesses, because whilst it was a JV in Australia, it wasn't entirely run in the way that I ran BDH Sterling UK. And I wanted it to really be a kind of aligned, consistent journey for our clients. And so we've been on that journey over the past 3 or 4 years to really get both businesses under a single group operating model and operating in a consistent way, so clients get a consistent experience across the business.
And I think you mentioned 50, team of 50. What's the rough split in the countries?
I think we're about 18 in the UK and the rest in Australia. And most of the Australian team are in Perth, but we've also got an office in Sydney as well.
And then client-wise, would you say where's majority of them in Australia versus the minority still transitioning, or vice versa? Yeah,
so the majority are in Australia. Some people do come back, and we help those people as well. So we do have UK clients that come to us and say, we've lived in Australia, we've got these Australian assets, we don't know what to do with them, and we can help them unpick all of that and get things set up for the UK. So we do both ways, but most people tend to be going that way down to Australia. Yeah.
And how do you bring the two teams together? Given that different time zones,
yeah,
different regulations, they've probably both learned in their own respective countries, their regulations. How do you manage that?
Yeah, good question. It has its challenges. We've adopted a kind of group operating model so that we've got someone responsible for financial planning across the two jurisdictions so that we can get a consistent approach to the way we run things. We've got someone who's in charge of operations for the group, and then we've got various group functions so that the kind of leadership is aligned in terms of how we run the business. And yeah, a lot of early morning calls to Australia. We are really closely connected with our Australian colleagues, and people often move between the offices, so we support people to move between the offices. We've sponsored a lot of people to go and work in Australia, so I've spent time working in the UK and then moved to our Australian offices. So yeah, we've got a range of tactics that we've employed to kind of get that consistent approach.
And did you always have that group function approach, or is that something that you've kind of navigated as you've gone through this?
Yeah, that's something we introduced post the acquisition of our joint venture partner in Australia and the leader of that business retiring. Yeah. That's when we introduced the group operating model and tried to get that kind of alignment across the business so that we're not only delivering a consistent client experience, but also a consistent employee experience, and we've got a consistent employee value proposition as well.
And just talk me through, how do you even start this for a client? So Kate comes to you with clearly an aspiration to move to Australia, or may have already been in the process of doing so. How do you even start to set that up? And I'd be interested to hear about the different regulations in both, and I guess what you've got to watch out for and what you've got to navigate.
Yeah, so some people plan ahead and will get advice prior to migrating, are really organised, and we can obviously help them throughout that entire journey. A lot of people actually engage with us after they've moved.
Interesting.
Because their priority is getting their visa, getting their removal sorted, etc., etc. Financials tends to be lower down the list. So we engage with people at different stages of their journey. Obviously, the earlier they plan the more we can help them, the more value we can add. But we also engage with people when they're in Australia, and it's normally when they've got a pain point, they've got an issue that they need help with. So we spend a lot of time thinking about how we can help our clients with the problems that they generally have. Because if you've got a cohort of people that have gone on a similar journey, they have the same type of problems. And
what would a typical problem be?
So that might be something like how to transfer their retirement savings down to Australia. So, and we'd help them with that process. It might be tax compliance around having a UK rental property because they've kept their home and they're renting it out. It might be currency transfers. It might be, tax considerations around disposal of assets and so on and so forth. We've got a team of people that are really well versed in helping people with solve those kind of problems, and we help them solve the problem, and that's kind of what attracts them to us as a business, because they can identify that we can help them solve that problem, and then ultimately they become financial planning clients, and it's general kind of financial planning it eventually becomes, but you're helping them to solve that initial problem and onboarding them as a client, and that's what I guess attracts clients to us, and why it's been kind of really valuable to us to have that niche offering where we can differentiate.
And just from a BDH point of view, I'm assuming that with the group function, that not only must happen across processes and people, but actually the underlying investment structures that you think about. How do you approach that, given that you've got two jurisdictions?
Yeah, it's a good question. And initially we were working with investment research partners in the UK and investment research partners in Australia, and two different sets of ideas. Clients will often have portfolios in both jurisdictions because, say, with your pension fund, it can take a number of years to transfer the fund into Australia because there are caps on the amount you can transfer each year. And so we often have clients with money in both jurisdictions. And so if we have two different portfolios with two different best sets of ideas, it's not a very coherent story for the client. So over the past year, we've gone about selecting an investment partner that can help us on a global basis, and we now have an evidence-based investment solution that we use for our clients across the UK and Australia, and it's multi-currency in GBP, Aussie dollar, and we can get access to the Aussie dollar share class in UK retail product, so that we can remove currency risk and so on, and give the clients that consistent story about their portfolio and consistent approach, so that it makes sense to them if you've got a single investment philosophy that you can easily convey to them.
And how did you go about securing? I mean, I know from Timeline's viewpoint, we went through pain points to get institutional share class, and we live in the UK to be able to have that in pounds and pence. How did you manage that with a foreign currency? Well, we found a firm that could help us on a global basis. It took us a while to find someone who could help support us with that. And we've got a reasonable amount of AUM across the two businesses, and our position to them was, if you can help us develop a joined up solution for our clients, then we'll be able to provide a significant inflow of business across the UK and Australian business. And so there was an incentive for them to develop a solution for us, which they've done in really good time actually, and we've just started investing into the fund recently over the past few months actually, and that's all going well so far, so good. And on that note, tell us a little bit about the company then, size and client type, and just sort of a little bit around the background.
So we've got around 500 million sterling of assets under management across the two jurisdictions. We help about 1,200 families, and revenue of I think 5.5 million this year. We're budgeting 6 million for next year. So organic growth has been pretty good, and that AUM has really built up since we launched the Australian office. So whilst we've been going 15 years, it's really the last 10 years that we've been retaining the AUM post helping people move. So, and that's almost entirely kind of organic growth.
I suppose then it's kind of the referral process from people coming to you in the UK because they've got a niche ask and therefore they're doing their homework on where best to go. And then I guess on the flip side, when they've landed in Australia, if they haven't sought that advice, they'll have a community of people they can go and again seek advice from. Yeah. Do you then find that you've got clients coming off the back of it in Australia, you know, is where they've, you know, potentially get befriended locals and other families?
Yeah, we do. And people will typically, Brits will typically spend time with other Brits in Australia. And so there are those kind of communities. We do get a lot of our business through client referrals. But also because Brits are pretty easy to find in Australia, kind of highly identifiable in terms of social media, marketing, etc., etc. Being able to target those clients by showcasing our kind of unique offering. We're the only chartered financial planning firm with offices in both jurisdictions. There's a handful of companies that are licensed in both, but I think we've certainly got one of the leadership positions in that space, and so that's worked really well for us.
Advisor 3.0 is back. Financial planners, are you ready? One day, over 20 game-changing sessions. On May the 15th, 2025, London is the place to be if you want to shake up your skills and network with the very best. Oh, did I not mention? National Tim Peake is a headline speaker. Yeah, that Tim Peake. So get your tickets now at advisor3.0.co. Don't just stay in the game, lead it.
Just give our listeners an idea of a couple of examples which would be different in the UK to Australia. I can think of one big one that you and I discussed.
Yeah.
You know, can you share a couple of examples in sort of the day-to-day things you're having to think about and advise on?
In terms of client needs and.
Yeah, well, I think you'd shared with me there's no IHT in Australia. So, you know, that's a big consideration when you've been taught in the UK to plan for it and do what you need to do to be able to, you know, gift it or spend it, make sure that you are thinking about it. And yet all of a sudden you land in Australia and you don't have to worry about IHT anymore.
Yeah, clients are always very, very pleased when you tell them about that one. And yeah, there are rules to be outside of the scope of UK IHT. It used to be that you needed to establish a new domicile of choice in Australia, and we could help them to understand what they needed to be doing and thinking about to establish that domicile of choice in Australia, because it's not as easy as just ceasing residency and acquiring a domicile of choice. You needed to evidence that you intended to spend the rest of your life there, and there are various steps you should take. But with the new IHT rules, that's now changing to a 10-year kind of tail. When you leave the UK, there's a 10-year tail where you're still going to be on the radar for IHT with your global assets, and then after 10 years, your UK assets will still be accessible to UK IHT. So we can help people with their planning around that.
I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Simon, when we spoke, CureOps was, you know, bought in latterly in comparison to when you started looking after clients in both the UK and the Australian market. And for our listeners that don't know, CureOps is the qualifying recognised overseas pension scheme, which allowed, you know, essentially people to migrate to different countries and move their pension pots. Do you think that's helped part of this planning process that you do now?
Yeah, there's certainly complex rules around CureOps, and prior to CureOps there were a different set of rules, and it was you could transfer all of your funds to Australia in one go and access the whole thing tax-free. It was pretty simple, and because it was pretty simple, didn't really need as much advice as it does now. CureOps rules have changed and evolved over the years, and in order to transfer your pension fund to Australia, you'll need to use a CureOps in Australia, and there's a pretty limited choice in terms of public offer funds. And a lot of people set up something called a self-managed superannuation fund, which is their own fund, and then they apply to HMRC for cure-up status, and then they can receive transfers into that fund. And we run SMSFs for these self-managed super funds. We run those funds for about 400 or 500 families, and we help them with it. You have to complete a tax return for the fund each year. You have to have an investment strategy, etc. And we help clients with that, and it's kind of an example of developing a solution, I suppose, to the problems our target clients face, and we can support them with that on an ongoing basis, which is good for us because it forges a kind of deep client relationship then.
Absolutely. And they certainly don't cover this off when you're watching, you know, the TV program about, you know, what was it?
Wanted Down Under.
Wanted Down Under. They certainly don't cover any of this detail
No,
of, you know, it's just, is this the good house or the good school? So, and I can see how actually then because it must be quite an emotional, turbulent time. Not, you know, there's lots of emotions involved. Yeah. There's lots to consider. Yeah. And then, you know, add in then understanding how it all works. It does feel as though it's kind of just adding that layer of value. Yeah. And I guess you're able to then point them in directions for things outside of financial planning as well, you know, but whether or not it's to do with.
Yeah. And it's why we like, you're right about it being a kind of an emotional and stressful kind of decision-making process. It's why we like having planners in Australia that have made the move themselves. So yeah. we've got a number of planners that have qualified in the UK and then moved to Australia and got qualified there because they understand the issues our clients face, and we can support them and really empathise with the decisions that they're making. Do we stay in Australia? Are we going to go back to the UK? Having family back in the UK, elderly parents, for example, that can be a big pull for people, and we use our experience to make sure that people don't make decisions that are not reversible, which could have significant tax consequences. So whilst there are really good benefits to transferring your pension fund to Australia because you can access it tax-free, it's not reversible that easily, and so we need to make sure that clients are 100% staying in Australia and it's the right decision for the longer term, and that's where we can use our experience.
Absolutely. Do you find there's a little bit more kind of coaching than you ordinarily would have done as a UK one jurisdiction advisor? Certainly
there's a lot more technical, there's a lot more technical aspects to it that we need to educate the clients around and coach them through that kind of decision-making process around their future plans and what they should be doing. So yeah, I think that would be a fair comment.
Brilliant. And any plans for a third jurisdiction? You've got headspace for another one?
Yeah, when we first started BDH, we were helping clients globally, and we weren't able to add as much value to clients. So we decided if we really, really get a deep understanding of how the UK and Australian system interact, we'd be able to add more value to clients. We'd be able to differentiate from others that are providing global advice. So we just became laser focused on UK, Australia, and just doing more of the same and getting better and better at it. So we've still got a lot to do in Australia. I still want to grow the business there, but one day, who knows? Who knows?
And is it because you saw that the direction of travel was that there was huge amounts of people moving to Australia versus, you know, so I'm just trying to understand why Australia in the first place?
Well, it's an English-speaking country, which makes it a lot easier, right? And there's 1 million British-born people in Australia. So whilst it is a niche business, there is quite a big kind of target market. And it's a nice place to go and visit on business, which I'm fortunate enough to do a few times a year. So that's all worked well, but the time zone is a challenge. I
can imagine. Because there's a 4-hour crossover, is that right, with the UK from a timing perspective?
Or yeah, it depends on time of year. Yeah, okay. So if you've got British summertime and what have you. So, but we tend to have calls from 6, 7 a.m. in the morning. So I've had to become an early bird and get used to those early morning calls.
So I guess technology such as Zoom and Teams has become your friend over the years.
Yeah, that's been a game changer for us. now everyone uses Teams, and Zoom. And it's helped us become much more connected with our colleagues in Australia. So that's been great.
Any colleagues from Australia that's moved this direction yet?
We've had a few that come and visit. They don't tend to stay.
I wonder why that is. And just talk me through, you use ESO in the business.
Yes.
Can you just talk me through that and the whys and how?
We actually saw Gino Wickman at Advisor 3.0, and I'd used some of the tools from Traction in the past and found them quite useful. But hearing Gino speak, he really sold me on running the whole business on the operating system. So we engaged a professional implementer late last year to help us embed ERS in the business. And so far so good. I mean, we're not that far into it, but I've found it to be really effective so far. We've only rolled it out across the executive team fully at the moment, and we're starting to expose more of it to the business. But we think it will help us get alignment across the business, get that culture of accountability, but also a really healthy corporate culture as well. So we're really excited about what it's going to do for us as a business. And when you are managing business remotely and you can't see what's happening on a day-to-day, it's all very well going into a meeting or a Zoom call, but if you're not in the office and observing and seeing what's happening on a day-to-day basis, it can be hard to manage teams remotely. And so I think this is going to help us get that kind of alignment across the business and be really clear with what our priorities are and so on. So, yeah, we think it's going to be a good move for the business. And when we were doing our homework on EOS, I actually met with a firm in Australia who had used our implementer, and they've just won Firm of the Year with the FPAAA in Financial Planning Association in Australia. And so that, for me, kind of validated that it would be a good move for us. And I know quite a few good firms in the UK who use EOS as well. So far, so good.
Perfect. And so let's just talk a little bit about you, Simon. And I think you've got plans this year to go down under yourself on a more permanent basis.
Yeah, we're going to make the move later this year. So I lived there for a couple of years before when we set the business up in Australia, but then came back. We've decided it's the right time to move the family across to Australia, and we want to really grow the business in Australia. And now with the business being larger on that side, it makes sense for me to be there as well. So, do
you need a financial advisor to have a chat to about any planning requirements on the way through? I might know a few that be in their way. Well, and then how does it work? I guess, is there any challenges or pitfalls that for you have been a great learning curve though? So at the time may have seen a pain point, but actually has transpired the way you think about or handle something moving forward.
I think in terms of running the business, making sure we've got really clear alignment in terms of how the business is what our goals are, what we're focused on, what our objectives are. Being really clear about that, giving the team a real clear sense of direction. So if they are working from a distance, and you're not there on a day-to-day basis, they know what our objectives are, and they can factor that into their decision making. And we're really clear about what we're trying to do as a business. That's been the biggest thing for me. And over the past 3 years, I think we've got much better at that now. We've implemented that group operating structure. That's been a bit of a game changer for us, I think.
And there was something that you were telling me about, and I think you called it the Royal Commission in Australia. And I really liked the idea of this because, correct me if I've got this wrong, in Australia, somebody has to essentially reconfirm their advisor every 2 years and essentially opt in again.
Yeah. So the rules have just changed. They've changed a couple of times, but it came in off the back of the Royal Commission, I think in 2017, when it was found that a lot of firms were taking on going fees but weren't delivering service, and so it became necessary for clients to opt in every year to reconfirm that they want to continue to pay fees for advice, and I guess it has forced firms to ensure or deliver the annual review service that they should be providing, and if an annual review isn't held, you refund the fees. So it's been really effective ensuring firms actually deliver on service. It's not been universally popular because it is a huge administrative burden, because you're opting in for product and advisor fees. So it's different forms, different sets of paperwork, and they've now introduced it so it can be a single form for the advisor fee and the product, but then if the client's got multiple products, it's still not particularly effective. So it's not been universally popular, but it probably has had the desired outcome in ensuring that firms are actually delivering on service.
I quite like the concept, though, of this kind of almost holding advice firms' feet to fires in terms of you know how they're looking after clients and what they need to be thinking about. And do you think it's something that we should almost look to replicate in the UK?
Yeah, I think the FCA are doing their review at the moment, aren't they, into ongoing advice, and I think they published their initial kind of findings a couple of weeks ago. So the regulators definitely kind of compare notes and exchange information, and it'll be interesting to see what is rolled out later in the year. I think they're going to communicate further on the subject. So it will be interesting to see what happens in that space. But I think the good thing is from their initial findings, I think 98% of clients were either provided a review or at least offered a review, which is good to hear.
And in Australia, we talk about in the UK the advice gap. What does that look like in the Australian market?
Yeah, good question. It exists there too. Following the Royal Commission, there was a change in education standards for advisors over there, and it was introduced that it was necessary to have a degree, a financial planning degree, and complete an ethics qualification. And any new entrant also has to complete something called a professional year. So there were this raft of changes, and advisor numbers have dropped from 25,000 to 15,000 off the back of that. They did do a bit of a U-turn and then introduced grandfathering for advisors with at least 10 years experience, I think, but there has been a mass exodus from in terms of advisor numbers, and now certainly the hurdle to become an advisor is much higher, which I think is a good thing, right? Because it's helping us move towards more of a profession, and that's been good. And a lack of a supply of advice is a good thing for advisor firms, I suppose. But it would be good to see that advice gap close as well.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because it almost feels as though the regulation, or the journey certainly to being regulated in Australia, seems slightly stricter in terms of where you've got to get to and the hurdles you've got to jump through. And then when you've got to get to that point, you've then got to kind of demonstrate this 2-year maintaining the client relationship and that you're giving the service. Yeah. And yet in the UK, we have probably, if not the same, slightly bigger in depreciation of advisor numbers, and yet it's not as a laborious journey to get there. You know, you can start practicing and shadowing and being involved in client meetings a lot earlier than you can from an Australian market, which I think is a good thing, because I think it encourages people to understand the actual day job in terms of what financial planning is. I'd just be interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment, and I think it was a bit short-sighted to introduce that degree qualification without any grandfathering, so it's seen advisor numbers leave in Australia, and I do prefer the UK regulatory environment, if I'm honest. Each has its pros and cons, but I think on the whole, I know the FCA get a lot of flack here, but I think they do a reasonable job relative to the Australian equivalent. So
interesting. And how do you manage fees then if you've got, you know, you've got clients with potentially a fee or a foot, shall we say, in both camps.
Yep.
How do you manage that from a fee perspective?
Yeah, so we collect fees in both jurisdictions. If we're managing money here in the UK, we'd collect those fees under the UK environment, and then in Australia under the Australian regime there. So it is a bit of a
double bookkeeping.
Yeah. And yeah, it's like with our finance manager, he has to be across both systems, and it's been a bit of a journey for him because he's got that group kind of responsibility across the UK and Australia, which he's risen to really well. But it's, from a compliance perspective, our compliance team have to understand both sides. So
it's a huge ask, really, from anyone looking to join your firm in either jurisdiction. It's kind of almost really challenging the norm for not just understanding one place, but two.
Yeah.
And is there a difference in how each country charges? In the UK, it's very much driven by basis points or ongoing versus initial. Is that the same setup?
There generally be an initial plan fee in Australia, so a statement of advice fee, that'd be your financial planning fee. Implementation fees don't really exist in most firms, and then there's a fee for ongoing service, and that's either basis points or fixed, but it's typically the SOA fee and then the fee for service ongoing.
What would you say has been your biggest learn?
For me, well, as a financial planner, becoming a manager of a business with 50 people, it's been how to manage a business generally, I suppose. So that's been a huge learning curve for me, but it's been a really, really kind of rewarding and exciting kind of journey. But yeah, just trying to improve myself as a leader, taking on feedback and speaking with people who I respect in the industry and learning from others. That's probably been the biggest change for me, I guess, moving from being a financial planner that was I was a very technically proficient and competent kind of planner to advice a business owner. It's been quite a journey.
And what piece of advice would you give somebody who is thinking about potentially setting up a financial planning firm to cover the UK and another jurisdiction?
Yeah, I think when I look at successful businesses, financial planning businesses, I think a lot of them have a kind of a niche offering that enables them to attract clients, and that for us that's been key to our success. So focus on a particular niche, identify the challenges that cohort of people have, and think about how you can provide them with solutions that add value to help them solve those problems. That's what I would be thinking about if I was setting up a new business. If I was doing it from scratch, I'm not sure I'd pick UK and Australia again because of the challenges around the time zone. But yeah, that would be my advice, would be specialise in one specific area, do more and more of the same, and just get better and better at it. That would be my approach.
I was just going to ask you the reverse question then. If you could roll back the clock, what would you not have done? And I don't know if the answer is, study Australia now, pick a different jurisdiction. But what would your answer be? I
think I would probably be looking at how I could use tech to run my business really efficiently if I was setting up from scratch now. And that for us has been one of the big challenges, is because we're so different and unique that kind of off-the-shelf tech didn't really work for us, and we've had to be really develop kind of tailored solutions. So I'll be looking at how I could use tech and get and leverage that to run a really efficient advice business, because I think those firms that adopt tech over the next 5-10 years are going to be the winners. They're going to do really well. Yeah.
Which leads me nicely, because I was going to say, talk me through what that looks like for you and how you've utilised that.
So kind of 10 years ago, when we were looking at which kind of CRM to use, the kind of incumbent providers, it didn't really work for us because they were pretty inflexible in terms of what we needed. So we ended up using Salesforce, which is, you can customize Salesforce quite easily and leverage that. We did underinvest into Salesforce, and that's been a lesson. So I think it's a great tool, but we've underinvested over the years. But we're now, and we tried to do a lot of it in-house, whereas now we're using an external consultant, and we're doing a lot of work with Salesforce or Salesforce development at the moment. And we're also looking at how we use AI in the business. We've did a couple of AI trials this year, working with a firm that are looking to generate advice documents using AI technology that they've used in the R&D space. So we've participated in a trial there. We're doing that. We also looked at Saturn AI and using that for meeting notes and Copilot. So looking at how we can use AI in the business at the minute.
And that must be a greater challenge, because actually, talking about this only this morning and using an AI as a note taker, and actually picking up on all of these wonderful acronyms that, exist in the industry. And you've now got 2 countries that you have to pick up all of the different acronyms for. And what about cash flow planning, from that point of view, because you're obviously dealing with different currencies and
it's another example of the challenge in terms of, and what I was getting at when I was saying if I was doing it again, I'd look at how I could use tech. So with UK and Australia, I like Voyant. I like using I like the fact that it has all of the tax wrappers in the jurisdiction and so on. But of course, if we've got clients with assets in both, it doesn't work particularly well. So that's been an example of where we've had to really think about how we can use some Voyant effectively. They are in both countries, but you don't have the tax wrappers for respective countries if you've got clients with assets in both. So that's been a challenge, how we really embed cash flow planning into the business. But I think it's central to good financial planning is ensuring you are using that as central to the proposition.
Absolutely. And just finally then, from my side, Simon, family's planning to move later this year.
Yeah.
What are kind of the next 5-year goals then for BDH?
Next 5-year goals? I guess to really nail what we're doing in terms of having a really consistent client experience, so that if as a client you go into the office in Epsom, you go into the office in Sydney or Perth, you have a really consistent experience. Provide a great experience for our employees, and really try and consolidate that leadership position in UK and Australian advice. So we want to be the preeminent provider of UK and Australian cross-border advice. And we probably want to grow the business out to other states in Australia, and really have a national presence and be able to service clients throughout Australia.
Perfect. And a family dog, no? That's on the promise card?
It is on the promise card.
That's live on the podcast now. You do realise that, don't you, Simon? There's no going back now.
It was key to the negotiation was that if we went to Australia, we would get a dog, but I wasn't paying the £5,000 airfare to ship the dog there, so they've had to wait.
Well, we look forward to you and the dog coming back for a visit when you're next in the UK. Simon, thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Really, really insightful, and we wish you and your family a really safe move later this year, and look forward to hearing all about it.
Thanks, Kate.
That's a wrap on today's show. Massive thanks to my production crew, especially Jake Osha, Melissa Canham, and the entire team. And of course, to our sponsor, Timeline, the market-leading provider of integrated planning technology and model portfolio service to advisors. I do hope you've enjoyed today's show. Head over to Apple Podcast and give us your review there. Until next time, goodbye.